let me just summarize some of the challenges that they mentioned, and then I'm going to open it up to the rest of you to present some of the challenges that you're facing, and then we'll try to see where there might be common ground. So there was a challenge around internationalization and reaching multiple audiences. There was one with coping with legal gray areas. Many times when you're innovating, you're ahead of the law because the law is slow to catch up. A third area is how do you go about converting acts of engagement to acts of action? And then how do you cope with just when you're drowning in data to extract meaning from it, to curate it? And then finally, how do you know where to place your bets in an area of nonlinear change? Those are the ones that I was able to extract. So I'm going to open it up to the audience. I shouldn't say audience, our fellow participants, to share some of the challenges that they're facing. And let me do one quick exercise before that. So one litmus test I like to use in trying to figure out if something is a worthy challenge is to really think about what we want the future to look like. So can you raise your hand again if you are involved with an organization that is using technology some way to fight corruption? Okay. And keep your hands up. How many of you think that you can have 10 times more impact 5 years from now? Okay, how many of you think that you can have 100 times more impact 5 years from now? How many of you think you can have 1,000 times more impact 5 years from now? This is some ambitious people here. I like that. Okay, so I want you to think about the moment where you felt a little uncertain about whether you should keep your hand up, and I want you to search deep and say, what was it that I was worrying about? What is the challenge that makes me think I can't be 100 times the impact I have today, or I can't be 1,000 times the impact today? And those are the ones that I want us to focus on. And so I'll just open it up and let anyone who wants to kick it off.
Have been happening online. So I've been trying to move from the online realm to the mobile phone realm, where the challenges are quite daunting. So one challenge to take from Ramzi Jaber is that when you want to, let's say, show a pie chart or when you want to show a graph, etc., you can combine an enormous amount of information into a single graphic. Whereas if you want to communicate the same thing via mobile phone, it's very, very challenging. With the internet, you put a lot of information up, people come, they select what they want to look at. Whereas with the mobile phone, by and large, you communicate it to them, you broadcast, you select what information to send. On rare occasions, you can have these systems where you can have a lot of information and people will have to navigate through a very complicated IVR menu structure, which most people are not able to do. So in that sense, what I am really struggling with is that if I want to cross the digital divide into the realm of mobile phones, which is perhaps the one digital tool that's most broadly available in the world, how do we do that? How do we communicate a large amount of information using this tool, using the most basic feature phones? No Androids, no iPhones, nothing.
So dealing with the information constraints of mobile. Okay.
Hi. Biggest challenge is when you present this information in a very visual form. Basically, we want to really influence the policy maker, the decision maker. And really our systems are not really systems. They are a set of good individuals. So as long as you have a good IS officer or an officer who is willing to buy your ideas and take certain policy decisions very objectively, these all things work. But consistency, because we can't then really create a system, cannot create institutions. And that is a big challenge, because the moment the person gets transferred from that post, then again you are back to square one, and then waiting for a new person to come who will buy these ideas and take very objective decisions without bringing in mental corruption in it.
Okay, so that would be dealing with churn within your organization.
My name is Felipe Stefan from the World Bank. Thank you very much for the very interesting panel. I had just two challenges that were crossing my mind. One that relates to the final presentation from our colleague from Palestine, that is not just about giving meaning to data, but then turning that data into mainstream stories, and then having those stories actually inform policy making that leads to impact. And so that I just sort of wanted to add upon that previous challenge. And then the second one, which perhaps may seem counterintuitive to the one that Vivek shared, was actually on bridging online and offline. So while mobile technology has become increasingly pervasive, 65% of the world population still lives in environments without reliable access to internet. And so I wonder about, as we're thinking about citizen participation and increased transparency as tools to fight corruption, how do we best bridge online and offline?
Right over here.
Okay. So my name is Joylita, and I work with Janaagraha, and I'm part of the team that runs iPaidAbribe.com and iChangeMyCity.com. So we have two challenges. One on iPaidAbribe.com is how do we reach out to those people who are not literate and who are not educated, and therefore possibly cannot post a report by typing it in or by reading it. So how do we reach out to that? And one of the ways we could possibly look at solving that problem is voice reporting, but are there other innovative ways by which we can help people report and also read these? And the other is at the other end of the spectrum on I Change My City, which is where we want to reach out to government. And government is not always that keen on using technology. And I think that's where, and technology is sexy these days. It's not that it's not sexy, but it looks like it's not sexy enough for government. So how do we cross that barrier? So that's two challenges I think would be good to address. Thank you.
Given that there are multiple microphones out there and multiple people who want to talk, I won't point at specific people. If you have a microphone, use it.
Okay, I have a microphone. I'll use it. Thank you. So my name is Robert Hunja. I work at the World Bank. And we are very closely kind of observing this social innovation space, especially in the anti-corruption business. And there's two phenomena that we're struggling with. One is that there's, obviously, because this is the way you start when you're innovating, you start with kind of piloting or testing, yeah? And we are finding we are finding very few stories that have actually moved to scale. And by scale, I mean involving very large numbers of people on a continuous basis, whether it's just engagement or reporting, whatever. So if people have good stories where things have moved to really large scale on a continuous basis, we are very keen to hear about that. And the second piece, and my colleague Felipe has mentioned it, one of the challenges we are facing as we try and innovate, especially on governance things, is that kind of the typical hardcore economist will ask you, what is the evidence that this stuff works, or it produces results or impact? And we're struggling with what is the metrics, what is the measure of impact and success, especially in this space. So again, if anybody has some answers to this, we'll be very keen to hear. Thanks.
Thank you. I ran an I Paid a Bribe website in Zimbabwe. And so I put my hand down when you started talking about 1000X. And the thing I was thinking was that our government is not exactly the most pro-transparency government in the world. And so when you start to get to 1000X, there's a big risk that they may hunt you down and then try to shut you down. So yeah, that's a big challenge.
This improvisation of I paid bribe by Christina. Basically, I'm interested in 2 points she raised. One is, I did not pay the bribe, and the second is organic community solidarity. The later one seems to be very good because it is one step behind. It's proactively preventing a person from paying a bribe and seeking a solidarity from the community, which is very important. And I did not pay bribe, again, is a very important tool because it complements officers who are working honestly. I think these two initiatives are way forward, I feel. Thank you.
Yeah, two challenges I want to mention. One is actually already said about how do we reach those who don't have access to ICT and also not literate to the ICT is number one, because in our country, lots of people, those who have no access to ICT. And another point, maybe to Christina, that is actually, do you have any experience, the consequence of disclosure of corruption or maybe irregularities? Because in our context, if someone actually discloses any corruption or irregularities, they become the victim of sufferings or maybe the other kind of arrest or burnt away their houses. So do you have any experience of consequences of disclosing corruption?
So building off of, I think the point made around going from online to offline, I think sometimes the simpler work is to actually, while it's difficult to get the data and disseminate the data, actually more difficult maybe to create the leaders who are going to actually work tirelessly for months and years to solve these issues. And so one of the challenges, I run an organization called Haya, and we train community organizers, is to really develop that cadre of offline leaders who take these issues and commit their personal time and energy behind them.
Hello, hi, I'm Naeem from Janavani, Pune. We launched a web-based application for participatory budgeting in Pune. This year, almost 2,000 people used the website and suggested the work that they want to do in the budgets. It's a very good website, but the challenge that we faced is we created the user ID and password for all the government officers who are responsible for the budgeting process. And every day I used to get like 3 calls, 5 calls from each officer saying that just get us the printouts. We're not going to log in the computer. And even when you say that, okay, can I email you the list of suggestions in an Excel sheet, they're saying, no, we just want an we just want a printout. And then we also created a tracking system of, all the budget, all the work that the people have suggested. It's already there on the web. They just have to click a button saying that this is accepted or this is rejected, and your report can be generated. But they're just not ready to do that. They're saying that, like the business as usual, we are going to do the offline work, and then after we have to wait for 6 months for them to publish a report. So I think this question was already asked, but how do we make the government officers work, get tech savvy?
Right.
Thank you.
I'm Akush Mori from Hungary. We run I Pay the Bribe in Hungary. I'm here behind the camera, guys.
It's hard to see with these lights are quite blinding.
So actually, the microphone was in my hand when you popped the question, but I couldn't respond immediately. And the reason was because I can't actually quantify the impact we make. So when you ask me 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, I don't know. The quantification is really difficult. The second part is I know that you actually, you made this an off-topic, but for us, funding is an issue. So if I see what are the major obstacles, they are not really technology related. They are, do we have the resources to execute them? The third one for me is what was being briefly mentioned by Jolita, is that we would like to have data access directly to government data. We would like to have web services or other machine processable forms of government data that we could work on. And this is very difficult to get. It's very difficult to influence the government to open up all the data they have in a machine processable form. We see international examples in this way, but in particular in Hungary, I find this a very, very huge obstacle.
Great. Just to clarify one thing, the challenges do not have to be technology related. It's just challenges that you would be facing as an organization. Yes, do you have a microphone?
Hi, I'm Asangar from Sri Lanka, and I run the I Pay the Bribe in Sri Lanka. So my question is to Christina, and how did you sort of educate the community about your site? My question is to you. So how did you educate the community about the site, and how did you sort of, did you have political backing, or did you sort of, how did you market your site? So I just launched I Pay the Bribe 2 months ago. So I just want to know about
So
that.
if you don't mind, I actually want to keep the conversation focused on generating challenges at the moment. I think the next step, as Vivek mentioned, tomorrow, and during casual time today as well, there'll be an opportunity to sort of compare notes and share best practices on solutions to some of these challenges, but because I don't want to let Vivek down, let's just stick with challenges for the moment.
Hi, I'm Kavita from Stanford Change Labs. My question is really around the topic of internet freedom, freedom of expression, and this tension between freedom of expression and privacy laws. Obviously, there's a wide variation in the legal frameworks across the globe. We typically have significant debates around this in the West, but I'm curious to see what is the nature of conversations in the South Asian context when we look at civic innovation and engaging broader participation by civil society. What are the kinds of conversations that happen around protecting the right to express, especially in the context of adoption of social media technologies and the internet?
Gotcha. So I'm going to note that one as essentially, how as an organization would you navigate this tension between freedom of expression and privacy? How about just a couple of more, and then I will do my best to try to run down this list and synthesize and get a sense of sentiment from the audience. This is where the digital tools would have really helped, but we'll try to do it manually.
One challenge is culture of secrecy, especially in the bureaucratic arena. They want to keep it secret rather than making those public. So that's a challenge. The other challenge is that in some countries, for example, in Bangladesh, we have legislated a ICT law, and that is threatening for disclosing information that may at times be interpreted to be either interpreted different way. So ICT law can be another challenge that one can face.
So Samidh, I'm going to go again. Over here. So there are a lot of people who've been talking about digital divide of different sorts. I want to add one layer to it, which is that typically in the work that we've been doing, I've been asking this question to a lot of others. The digital divide across class is something that a lot of people are thinking about, but the digital divide across gender seems to be equally as challenging. So if we are going to discuss that as one of the topics, I would want to add gender and perhaps other forms of identity, including caste, for discussion.
Great. Any others? I'm hoping for at least one more. I'm trying to buy 30 seconds while I collate. Okay, I'm going to collate real time then. So I've identified a certain set of themes based upon what folks have said. So I'm going to try to unpack some of the themes just to give you a sense of what's contained within each of them. And then I'll run through the themes and just kind of explain how I interpreted them, and then I'll run through them again, and I want to just sort of do a show of hands in terms of whether it's like one of your top 3 concerns. And so the first theme, more broadly speaking, is around how do you deal with marginalized or vulnerable populations? And so there was one aspect of this that's about digital divide and digital literacy. There's another aspect of this around protecting vulnerable people and when there are acts of disclosure that our tools create. How do you deal with gender and caste differences, et cetera? So there's one thing around protecting vulnerable populations. There is one around how do you develop a positive relationship with government officials and government bodies. So that has many aspects to it. How do you make the technology appealing to governments? How do you overcome a culture of secrecy? How do you encourage the opening of more data? There's another theme around conversion or the value chain in many of our tools and technologies. So how do you convert from awareness to engagement, from engagement to action? How do you convert from action to policy change, so I'm putting all that as sort of an argument for how do you go about improving that entire value chain or that entire workflow. Then there's also about measurement, and how do you go about introducing better evidence-based practices? How do you identify the right set of metrics for your own organizations? How do you quantify your impact? And how do you use that as a means of scaling and having more continuous improvement in what you do? And then finally, there's a set of challenges that deal more with the technologies themselves. So how do you deal with the constraints of mobile phones, given that they're a more narrow sort of informational bandwidth? How do you deal with internationalization and sort of the complexity that comes to your sites and dealing with that? How do you deal with within your own organization, making sure that there isn't too much churn in your technical organization? So those are all generally around kind of technology-specific problems.